And you worked at RPM for 8 years because they hired you on the spot.
They did.
And the record business, by the way, this is the 80s.
It was.
The record business was probably the most glamorous and sexy business in the world. At what was then BMG in New York, they used to have a line. Their offices were right in Times Square. There was a line of 6 limousines outside every day, just in case an executive or a rock star needed to go somewhere. They ordered flowers to the value, in the 1980s, flowers to the value of $4,000 a day just for decorating their offices. There was so much money in the record business that was by far and away, the reason we say a rock star life now is because of that. Now, of course, the entertainment business, the music business anyway, is where you could probably get Mick Jagger at a pub down the road if you really looked hard enough. And of course, selling records is not a profitable business. But then, in its heyday, what was it like?
Well, I think it was probably the most exciting music time of my life. I was employed as the PR manager of a very large record company. Essentially, what my job was to sell records. And through selling records, I dealt with the media. I hustled. I was a big hustler. But the critical thing here was, in this job, you had to have relationships. And if you didn't have those relationships, you were fired. You were out of there. You know, I had to deal at a very tender age with some of the most egotistical, nasty media in this country, who tested you all the time, you know, kept you on edge, kept you anxious, worrying about whether you were going to be okay, because you were always on edge, thinking you might get fired. It was an extraordinary time in my life. I traveled the world for the record company. I became a label manager for A&M Records, for Motown Records, and I must tell you, Motown Records was just my passion. Island Records. I flew overseas. I represented South Africa in conferences. At that stage, artists were coming to Sun City, and they were on the labels that I was representing. And I was there to build a team of PR experts in the music industry. I had no idea of what I was doing when I started, but I thought, throw me in the deep end, and let's see where it takes me. It was tough. At the same time, I had my own television show, and I was on, and you're all again too young, there was a channel called Television 4, TV4. Does anyone remember it? Oh, thank goodness. Yay! Oh, I'm so pleased. Thank you. High five to you.
Thank you, Methuselah.
Yeah. Anyway, I had a music show on twice a week, and Leon Schuster was my co-host. He was the Afrikaans, and I was the English, and we used to do music videos, and we used to do interviews in the streets. And I was working 7 days a week. I had a team of 8 people in the PR department. I was doing 9 or 10 shows a weekend so that we could catch up. I was traveling. I was adrenalized. Adrenaline actually became my drug. That's what it was. I couldn't live without it. It had to be high. It had to be flying. It had to be on the go. In fact, I was always sort of close to hyperventilation, and I'm a very excitable person. And I felt that I started burning out. I was actually at a very young age doing way too much. And at the same time, I was competing in a business where I was way too young, and I had all men bosses in those days. It was very rare to have sort of young women working in those positions, and I was promoted to marketing manager. And I decided that I needed to actually move on. I'd been offered so much work during that 8-year period that I had like a business brain for 1 second. And the business brain was, why don't I try and bring all of those offers, or try to bring them into my own business? And firstly, I can get the experience, because you never stop learning. I still am learning. And I can earn some bucks.
But to start your own business, you needed a little bit of initial capital.
Oh, no, absolutely.
And who did you go to first to get some money?
Well, I actually went to my boyfriend at that stage, who actually is my husband now, just by the way. So I went to him and I said, please won't you give me 5,000 Rand to start a business, and I'll give you 50% of my business for nothing. I'll just run it. He said, are you crazy? Go ask someone else. I went to my father and I said, Dad, please won't you give me money for my business? He said, I think it's time you got a real job. So I decided, you know what, bugger them all. I'm actually going to go and sell my clothes at the market theatre. Do you remember when they had the flea market there? I took my clothes in the boot of my car, and I made 1,800 rand. Okay, so now I've got my 1,800 rand. What I need to start a business? I didn't have a clue. So I went and I bought a typewriter down in Decker's Road. You know, they've got those sort of antique shops. They call them pawn shops now, but they were those antique shops. I bought a typewriter for 75 bucks. Most of the keys didn't work, but I thought it would be totally acceptable if I used the typewriter. But I could write in the A's and the E's and the P's. I mean, that was totally acceptable. You know, there was no protocol in what I was doing. I couldn't afford stationery. So in those days, and most probably people still use them, you could get a little stamp made with my little logo. My business was called Profile. And I had about 20 colors of ink. So I would just do my letterheads and stamp, make it pretty. I'd do my invoices handwritten. I'd put my stamp on it. And that's how my business started. A telephone and in my bedroom.